Hello, friends. Lee Camp. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Marisa Renee Lee. Marisa is an award-winning author of Grief is Love and the newly released Waiting for Dawn, subtitled Living with Uncertainty. Marisa has a remarkably diverse resume. She graduated from Harvard as an undergrad. Then she went on to work on Wall Street in banking, then served as a senior appointee in the Obama White House. She's then become something like an advocate for grief, work that's arisen out of her own navigation of multiple personal losses. And so I sort of think of her work as something like sitting at the intersection of a Venn diagram of personal pain, social trends, and public policy. She keeps pushing us to convert private sorrow into community care, institutional action, and I especially appreciated her rejection of toxic positivity and this sort of cultural pressure simply just to move on when difficult things occur. Instead points us towards hope as a demanding and disciplined practice. Lots of highly practical takeaways. A lovely interview. Here's Marisa Renee Lee. Hello, friends. Lee Camp here. There is, as you may have noticed, no shortage of content in the world. Opinions endless, outrage plentiful. Deep wisdom and thoughtful perspective, slightly harder to come by. That's part of why we created the NSC Notebook. It's our weekly email from the world of No Small Endeavor with reflections on a good life, behind-the-scenes insight into our interviews, and quotes that stuck with me long after those conversations ended. You'll also get a curated list of what I'm reading, watching, and listening to, books, movies, music, and other things I think are actually worth your time. It comes to your inbox every Tuesday, completely free. So if you'd like one less thing to doom scroll and one more thing to actually enjoy, sign up for the NSC Notebook at nosmallendeavor.com. Starting something new is hard and honestly can be terrifying. When we started No Small Endeavor, there were plenty of what ifs. What if no one listens? What if it doesn't work? But sometimes the thing worth doing is precisely the thing that requires you to take a leap. And if you're starting a business, Shopify helps make that leap a little less daunting. Shopify, the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S. Hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand style. And you can also get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you with email and social media campaigns. If you get stuck, Shopify is always around to share advice with their award-winning 24/7 customer support. It's time to turn those what-ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/NSC. Go to shopify.com/NSC. That's shopify.com/NSE.
Hi, friends. It's Annie F. Downs here, and I am so beyond excited to share with you that I have a brand new TV show called I Gotta Ask that begins airing Thursday, May 28th on The Wonder Project, which you can find through your Amazon Prime Video app. You may have heard of The Wonder Project because they're the ones who brought you The House of David, and I am so honored and honestly have zero chill that I get to partner with them to make this dream come true. I love how Wonder Project is not only creating great original TV and movies that audiences can experience together, but also curating content via their subscription on Prime Video filled with meaningful stories. The first 2 episodes of my talk show, I Gotta Ask, premiere on May 28th, followed by 2 episodes each on June 4th and June 11th. In every episode, I sit down with a group of friends, some experts in their fields and some thought leaders, some just my real life people. And we talk about things like, why is dating so hard in 2026? Or how do I build a business? What do I do with fear and anxiety? And so many more questions that I just had to ask. I cannot wait to hear what you think. You can subscribe today at igottaask.com.
Welcome to No Small Endeavor, Marisa.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, pleased to have you. And pleased to you're in talking to you in your home in help the Southerner, Poughkeepsie,
Poughkeepsie,
Poughkeepsie, New York. Yes,
it is a mouthful.
Yeah. Well, great to get to talk to you today. It seems to me that to even begin to get at the great riches of your work, one might have to think in terms of a Venn diagram with maybe a lot of different overlapping circles of disciplines and work that you've done. But if I were to ask you to describe your current work in terms of a Venn diagram, what would be the circles that are overlapping?
I love that. I think the overlapping circles are like love, healing, and equity. I spent a lot of time sort of thinking about, does my work make sense? Because there's a lot of different things that are always happening at once, research projects, there's client work, and then there's, my writing and speaking. And I realized that, across everything, my goal is to ensure that everyone has the ability to live a full and joyful life, no matter the circumstances of their birth or the things that might happen to them in the course of their life. Like, that's what I think everyone deserves. And every part of my work gets at that overarching goal, or I try to make sure it does.
Yeah. And it's really interesting to me that as you answered that instead of seeing grief as one of the circles you used, you chose healing, which I find a very helpful kind of inversion maybe of the expectation there. And yet the grief topic obviously is another thread that you're grappling with as well. And that also reminds me, recently it seems like repeatedly we've had guests where the work that they're doing seems to relate in a profound way with their relationship with their mothers. And it seems that might be true for you as well. But how would you share with us a little bit about the way in which your own kind of notions of healing and grief were informed by your experience with your mother?
Absolutely. First of all, I was very, very fortunate. I just had one of those really amazing moms. Our house was one that kids in the neighborhood were just always in and out of. Everybody knew where the snacks were. Everybody knew like when we were hanging out, in the pool, in the backyard, like playing games. And my mom loved that. Like, she was PTA, Sunday school teacher, jazzercise, like volunteering all the time, all over the place. And then one day, almost exactly 30 years ago, she got sick and she just never got better. So I was 13 at the time. She was in her late 30s, and it would take doctors 3.5 years to figure out what was actually wrong with her. And it turned out she had multiple sclerosis. And by the time they figured it out, the disease had done permanent and irreparable damage to her brain. And so, growing up, there was a lot of grief and uncertainty. But even in the midst of that, no matter how sick she was still doing for us like the best Sweet 16 party, the most fun sleepovers, like all of the mom things, I guess. And then as I was graduating from college, Mom got really sick again. They were trying to figure out, is this a complication from MS? Frankly, there were even doctors who were sort of like, is this all in her head type judgments. And it turned out she had stage 4 breast cancer that had already migrated to her skeletal system. And so that's why she was in so much pain, because, she just had cancer like all up and down her spine, her rib cage, just, it was really, really horrible. And so after I graduated, I spent a year at home with Mom and Dad, just kind of trying to help them figure out how to navigate that diagnosis. And then began to split my time between a career on Wall Street and up here in the Hudson Valley, helping to take care of my mom. She passed away just about 3 years later. And I thought I was prepared for that loss. I knew it was coming. She and I had very honest and upfront conversations about it. I was one of the primary people managing her care. I am just naturally a pragmatic and strategic person. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to read On Death and Dying. I'm going to do research to figure out how else I can support her. And so when it happens, it won't be so bad. And then it happened and it was terrible. And I felt like I must have done something wrong because I just had no sense for the experience of grief and how daunting and disorienting it can be. And I was a newly 25-year-old single living in New York, working on Wall Street and just trying to figure out how to navigate this horribly painful experience. And it was about 6 months after she died, I decided there's nothing wrong with me. Like where the problem exists is in how we treat people who are grieving and how we talk about grief and loss, like in our society. And I wrote in a journal back then, I'm going to write a book about grief and loss. It won't be sad and depressing, and it will be a New York Times bestseller. And that book finally came out in 2022 with lots of life twists and turns in between. And more recently, I have found myself in a place where I feel closer to my mom in certain ways than I ever have, even though she's been gone for over 18 years. Because a couple of years ago, I became a sick mom myself. And through this experience, I should say, of illness and healing and trying to parent, like, I just feel like I have a much better understanding of her existence and also, how hard she worked for our family than I ever did before.
Yeah, there's so much there I want to follow up on. But I want to go back to there you are on Wall Street. And I think I read that you're even have spreadsheets and all sorts of ways that you're thinking about how you're going to navigate this season. And then, or maybe having panic attacks at work out of that experience of grief. How would you describe your, in abstract terms, how would you describe kind of your posture or attitude toward grief? And where do you think that came from?
So when I first lost my mom, my posture and attitude was, I don't want to have anything to do with this. This is terrible. I just want to, I just kept wanting to get back to Marisa. Like I wanted to be young and carefree and, going on dates and being a banker and just, having that like New York City fun young person life. Today, I will say the way that I think about grief is just a normal part of life. There are very few guarantees in this life. And I think one of them is that at some point we are all going to encounter different forms of grief or uncertainty or pain that we're going to have to figure out how to navigate. And I think the sooner that you accept that this is just the way that life is, the easier it becomes to navigate those more challenging moments.
Yeah.
And I think that posture comes from, unfortunately having a lot of different experiences with grief, normal losses like the loss of my mom and grandparents. I lost a young cousin to COVID. I've lost cousins to violence. I've lost my fertility. I've lost pregnancies. Like there just have been a lot of losses. And I've just come to recognize that at some point it happens to all of us. And if we can really deeply accept that when it shows up, it's a lot easier to ask for help or to explain to someone else what you're experiencing and, reduce feelings of loneliness and isolation and shame.
What do you see as critical cultural, political, economic contributions to a sort of impoverished notion of grief? That is, that want us simply to get on with it? Or do you think that's just a natural human inclination to say, I don't want to have to deal with the pain of grief? Or do you think that there are factors in our civilization, our cultural trends that make it all the more difficult to accept, work through, even embrace grief?
I think it is absolutely a cultural element because, when you think about how different cultures around the world view and handle grief, in so many other, both faith traditions and cultural traditions, there is both greater proximity to death, whether it is the washing of the body that happens in Islam, and also better understanding of, the fact that you need time and space to heal. Like I think about in the Jewish tradition, both the opportunity to sit Shiva, which I've told my friends, like, when I go, if you're still here, like, I want you to sit Shiva and like eat bagels and drink bourbon and have cake and, talk about me, hopefully say nice things about me. And so I think also Native American cultures, like there are just there's so many different people all around the world who I think, frankly, are doing this better than we are. At some point in our society, somewhere between, my 4-year-old son and my 43-year-old self, we are told that, certain emotions, like the big, sort of harder to manage things like anger and grief and pain and lament, that like those are meant to be tucked away. They're not things that are meant to be shared. They're not really like publicly appropriate. And it's your job to take care of those big feelings on your own and kind of keep them hidden away. And I think a lot of that comes from capitalism. I think we struggle with anything that isn't productive. And so I just, I want to encourage people who are listening to kind of disconnect from that need for productivity and focus instead on your like actual humanity. When I see my 4-year-old, like the way he can just like move between big feelings that are on opposite ends of the spectrum with a speed that sometimes makes my head spin, I'm like, oh, like that's how we came into the world. Like that is normal. And, some of it I'm like, okay, dude, like, we're going to have to get over the fact that you can't watch that TV show right now. But most of it, I don't know. I feel like I've learned a lot from him.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned a moment ago that not only did you deal with this great loss of your mother that continues to this day, that you're continuing to process reality that you're living with, but you also then have had the encounter with long COVID. And for those who maybe are not familiar with what a very debilitating case of long COVID looks like, could you describe what your experience has been like with that?
Yes. So first of all, for context, for folks who just aren't familiar, and a lot of people really aren't very familiar with it, the easiest way to understand long COVID is immune system dysfunction that then triggers nervous system dysfunction. And when your nervous system isn't functioning properly, it then creates all of these other problems within your body. And so for me, I got COVID for the very first time in April of 2024. And, mind you, we'd been living life. Our kid was at school. I was on book tour, traveling, concerts, all the things. And I genuinely thought I was someone who was just never going to get COVID. And boy, was I wrong. And so, I had a bad COVID experience, not hospitalized or anything quite that traumatic, but I was sicker than I've pretty much ever been in my life. And, a week or so later, I tested negative, but I was still sick and spent months trying to figure out, what is going on. I was experiencing everything from shortness of breath, which then became lungs that had severe asthma. I'd never had breathing issues in my entire life. And now all of a sudden I can barely walk around my house. I can't have a conversation that's longer than 10 minutes without it hurting my chest and feeling like I'm just gasping for air. My larynx was over 70% blocked, in addition to my lungs not functioning properly. The bodily fatigue is like the flu plus the exhaustion of new parenthood plus the worst hangover of your life and just extreme weakness. Like I would get up in the morning and you're always exhausted because a part of the nervous system dysfunction is even if you can manage to sleep, and I've only been able to sleep medicated for the last 2+ years, but even when you're able to get that sleep, your body stays in this sustained state of fight or flight. And so you're sleeping, but like you're not actually getting like true REM sleep or recovery, which also slows down the healing process. So you wake up, you're exhausted. Some days I would have to spend 4 or 5 hours in bed before I could even stand up and take a shower. Other days I wouldn't have the strength to even take a shower. Horrible knee pain. I mean, it has been one of the most challenging and debilitating experiences of my life. And I do want to say for folks, who are listening and have family members who have long COVID or friends or who are dealing with it themselves, like there are things that work. I'm obviously in a much stronger and better place now. And so I always want to encourage people to find doctors who will really listen to you and try to help you, because there are things that are helping people live better lives with long COVID.
When you were in the kind of worst thick of all that, what was the process for you psychologically? I mean, how did you find ways to keep on going in the midst of that kind of weight that you were having to carry?
In the beginning, there was definitely a period where I will say, having encountered suicidal ideation in the past, it wasn't quite that, but it was very much, I didn't want the life that I had in that moment. The last thing that I wanted as the child of a sick parent was to be a sick mom. And it took us 5 years to get to our son. And never in the 5 years of trying to become a parent did I think that 2 years in, I would suddenly become disabled and not being able to pick up my kid, not being able to work effectively and provide for my family, and then just being in all of this physical pain. I was like, I don't want any of this. But eventually you come to a place, or at least I came to a place where I had to make a decision. I could either give in to despair, which totally reasonable some days. It was awful. Or I could say, okay, this is reality. I am going, and this is just like the way my mind works as a strategist. Like I can give in and like give up, or I can treat my body and this health situation the way I would treat a client challenge. Like, okay, what is the problem? What are all of the things that it might take to solve it? And then who are all of the people that can help me solve it? And it was actually through, treating it more strategically and sharing publicly that, I was struggling with long COVID, that I found my way to the doctor that I have now, who has been a game changer, and also found my way to someone who could serve as an arbiter of hope in the midst of all of this. It was a young woman who was following me on Instagram because my writing on grief had helped her cope with long COVID. And she was sort of at the end of her healing and recovery journey. And so, I suddenly had someone who I could text on a Tuesday morning and say, this is what's happening. Is there anything I can do to feel a little bit better today? And that was absolutely a game changer.
Fascinating. Spoon theory?
Yes.
How did that play for you?
Oh my gosh, so helpful. So I have a dear friend who's a disability justice advocate, Rebecca Coakley, and she also called me as soon as I shared that I had long COVID, and she said, you need to start thinking about yourself, your health, your life completely differently. And one of the things that she introduced me to is spoon theory, which is very popular in the chronic illness space. And it is essentially a way of explaining to other people, and even frankly to yourself sometimes, just how limited your energy is. Like there were certain days where I might only have, let's call it 3 spoons. And a spoon would be getting my kid ready and like out the door for school. Another spoon would be his bedtime routine. And then in between those two, the only thing I might do is take a shower. And that was all that my body could handle that day. And suddenly these activities that I had previously taken for granted as just, passive life things that, you do as you move through your day are major accomplishments. And it was hard. It was really, it was really hard for me, someone who I realized had attached a lot of, a lot of worth and value to my ability to accomplish things, to suddenly have that ability just completely taken away.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that. Here you are, you're a Harvard undergrad, you get immediately a job on Wall Street, you serve in the Obama administration in the White House, I mean, presumably accomplishing things and doing them well is of utmost importance to you.
Yes, pretty big priority.
Yeah.
And it all just disappeared.
Yeah.
One day,
Yeah.
it was gone.
How was the process of acceptance in regard to that I just can't do as much as I used to do? I suppose when it's just simply forced upon you, then it's simply forced upon you, and then you have to choose how you're going to go ahead. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes, and I was very stubborn. When I first found myself in this space where, I'll be honest, in my gut, I knew I had long COVID, but I didn't want to have long COVID. Nobody could even explain to me like what exactly it was, how it works, what the treatments are, what does a timeline look like? I was like, that is literally the last thing that I want to have in the world. And so I spent months going to doctors and specialists, like all around New York, down in the city, like the best of everything, trying to figure out if there was something else that was wrong that would just be easier to understand and presumably easier to treat. And it took me, and, again, still trying to push through. The summer after I got COVID, I was hired to teach a writing retreat in Greece. And I love Greece. I love writing. I love helping people figure out how to tell their stories. I'm like, this is a dream opportunity. And within, it was about 24 to 36 hours, I knew I was sick. Like I was up all night coughing, couldn't breathe, walking around the hotel property. And eventually I ended up being rushed to a pulmonologist in the middle of the night and had to fly home the next day because I never should have been there. I was too sick to be there. I could barely breathe. And at that point, when I came home was when I was like, okay, you need to face reality. And still it was really hard. I am the primary breadwinner, and, we have a mortgage, and I have a husband and a child, and those are very real responsibilities.
Yeah.
And so it was a process of learning that, if I pushed myself in the ways that I normally can push myself, I was going to set myself back. And it was only with that understanding that I was just like, oh, this isn't worth it.
In Waiting for Dawn, you talk about gray grief and this sort of state of this perpetual, chronic kind of grief that there can seem to be no end to, and a number of different kind of ways to approach that. And one of them is you kind of give us permission to that it's okay to flake. Unpack that one for us.
Oh, it's such a hard thing to do. And, I'm sure there are people who are like, what? Like, you can't flake. And it's like, actually you can. And when you give yourself permission to do that, it is very freeing, because when you end up in this place where you're dealing with some overwhelming challenge or uncertainty, whether it's your health crisis or, maybe it's a parent who you're trying to transition into a care facility, maybe it's a divorce, a challenge with your child, job loss, whatever it is, you need to be able to completely clear the decks so that you can deal with that thing appropriately, and also deal with like the stress that whatever it is you are having to face is going to bring to bear on you physically and mentally. Because if you don't do a really good, really intentional job of solely prioritizing yourself and your needs in those kinds of moments, you're not going to be able to show up for that parent going into the care facility. You're not going to fully heal from the divorce. You're not going to be able to effectively help your child if you're burnt out from also trying to keep up with, all of your normal mom stuff. And so I want people to take these life moments more seriously. And I think that, again, there's like this cultural conflict in that, we are trained to value all of these external markers of success and achievement and productivity to such an extent that we don't often recognize how much weight these other life events can carry. And I think it's really important to just like take a step back when you're in a moment like that and ask yourself, like, what do I need to be okay right now? Like, what do I need to get through this? And what do I need to get rid of?
Yes, thank you. Hello, friends. Lee C. Camp here. At No Small Endeavor, you know we spend a lot of time talking about a good life, but the truth is a good life is not something we can figure out alone. It's something we discover together in community. That's why we created Endeavor Together. Endeavor Together helps small groups gather to talk about the big questions of life using episodes of the No Small Endeavor podcast. Each series is a simple 4-week guide with questions, short videos, and prompts designed to spark meaningful conversation. We've just released our newest series called A Good Life. It's a 4-part exploration of what it means to pursue a life worth living in community. Here's how it works. Participants listen to a podcast episode ahead of time, then gather with a group to talk it through. We provide the framework for great conversation. The best part is, thanks to our friends at the Lilly Endowment Incorporated, it's completely free. You can explore A Good Life along with our other conversation series like Let's Disagree Better and Vulnerability by visiting nosmallendeavor.com or clicking the link in the show notes.
You know, I'm really passionate about making decisions that align with your faith and your values, especially when it comes to your family. And one area where that can feel really challenging right now is healthcare. Costs keep rising, and it's hard to feel confident that you're choosing the right path. That's why I wanted to share something I've been learning about called Liberty Health Share. It's not health insurance. It's a healthcare sharing ministry, which means you're joining a community of believers who come together to help carry one another's medical expenses. It's people living out the idea that we're stronger when we support each other and show up for one another. They offer programs for different stages of life and different budgets. So whether you're newly married, starting a family, or just looking for a better, more aligned approach, it's worth checking out. If you've been praying about a better way to navigate healthcare, this could be something to look into. You can learn more at libertyhealthshare.org. That's libertyhealthshare.org. Liberty Health Share, a force for good.
The 2026 FIFA World Cup meal at McDonald's is underway with one of 9 legendary cups in the lineup. Christian Pulisic, David Beckham, Lamine Yamal, Ronaldinho, Thierry Henry, Son Heung-min, Alphonso Davies, Santi Jimenez. And between the posts, it's Grimace. Get one of 9 collectible cups with a FIFA World Cup meal.
At participating McDonald's for a limited time while supplies last. All rights reserved. 2026 McDonald's at FIFA World Cup 2026.
What are other, in your mind, some of your most important advice, suggestions that you make in Waiting for Dawn that you might want to point us to right now?
So one of the first ones, we've already talked about this a little bit, but please don't be like me. Don't hang out in the land of denial. Be honest about what you are dealing with and acknowledge it as early as possible. Like I absolutely believe, and I don't beat myself up for this or anything. You know, it's human nature, and I've learned a lot in the last couple of years. But I believe that if I had owned what was happening earlier, I may have been able to reduce some of the suffering and pain that I experienced. So please, you know, when you know that there is this big thing that's taking over your life and you don't want to deal with it, just dig in and deal with it, because it's not going away. Like I tried to pray and wish and, you know, everything along COVID away, and like it did not work. So please don't do that. Another one that I find we often struggle with for a variety of reasons in our society is asking for help. You know, long COVID has been a deeply humbling experience. You know, because it was so hard for me to be on my feet, very basic life things that I was used to doing, you know, just about in my sleep, it became impossible. Like I couldn't cook for my family anymore, which has been my responsibility. I mean, gosh, on and off since I was a kid and my mom was sick. And so I had to ask for help with meals because it was just too much for me to take on many days. I couldn't wash my own hair. It was too exhausting. Like having my arms like up like that just destroyed me. And so I asked a girlfriend who's now become one of my best friends, and she's a hairdresser, if she would take that job off my plate and I could just sit at her kitchen sink and get my hair done. And it's actually worked out fabulously. And so getting comfortable asking for help, I really want to encourage people to do that. And then the third thing that is just so deeply important, no matter what the uncertainty is. And this isn't just, the opinion of one lady with long COVID. Everything in Waiting for Dawn is supported by research and data. And one of the things that I wanted to better understand is how does our mindset and like what we do and don't let in to our heads in terms of like thoughts that we attach ourselves to, like how does that impact your ability to deal with hardship? And if you are able to commit to a realistic form of hope, that mental commitment actually creates space for you to take action that will get you to where you're trying to go. And so for me, once I got out of the land of denial, it wasn't, I hope I feel better tomorrow. My mindset was, I will not live like this forever. Like, I am going to do whatever it takes to get to a better place. Like, I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know who I'm going to need to help me, but I know that I am going to get to a better place because I am going to commit to taking whatever actions are necessary to get there. And so I want people to try and commit to their own versions of hope. And it even matters when you are in, like, frankly, darker and harder periods of uncertainty. In 2023, one of my young cousins went missing. She was in her late 20s. She had dinner at my aunt's house on a Sunday. And I got a call that Thursday that no one had seen her and she hadn't been heard from since. And she was only, I think, like 4 or 5 weeks postpartum. And so it was, it was a really terrifying situation. And we had some ideas of, what we thought may have happened to her. And it was awful. I was honestly immediately confident that she had been killed. And in the midst of that, unfortunately, there wasn't room to hope that, or at least I couldn't hope that she would be found alive. And so, like, in that situation, the hope became just like getting my aunt closure. And like, that was my commitment. And I asked for a lot of help. And with, a bunch of friends and a pretty solid Rolodex of contacts, we launched a nationwide search and PR campaign to find my cousin. And 5 days later, they found her body.
Goodness. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, that one's still fresh. The trial was actually just like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are two very different kinds of grapplings with what hope means. This fresh grief with your cousin. I mean, I think one of the first things that just strikes me is that how do you process with yourself the fact that you've had such significant waves of substantive grief, like kind of one after another, after another, after another?
That's a great question. Honestly, it is something that I'm still working on. Last summer, I was diagnosed with PTSD and actually started EMDR therapy, which has been very helpful and effective. And it's funny in the context of, this book and all of the interviews and going on book tour, I also keep getting reflected back to me like, gosh, you and your husband have been through a lot of things. Like, is the next book going to be about marriage? I'm like, absolutely not. And so still processing it. And like I'm very much opposed to forcing the idea of meaning making on people. Just because something horrible has happened to you, that doesn't mean that, you have to do these like big, outlandish, Instagram worthy things with it. Is that what I have ended up doing in most cases? Yes. But I think I reached a point a couple of years ago where I said to myself, unfortunately, like this has been your life story on and off since you were 13 years old and your mom first got sick. So now you're 30 years into these like waves of grief and loss and uncertainty. And I think you should just, and maybe I'll be wrong about this. I hope I'm wrong, but maybe you should just accept that for you, like this is what life is, which also means on the other side of the coin, like you really have to double down on joy, because like you just don't know when these things are going to happen. Like I will never forget, like we were taking my son for his first haircut and we walk outside of the salon and my cousin has texted me that our other cousin is missing. And I was just like, what? I was literally like, what are you talking about? Like I truly thought that day that the most traumatic thing I was going to have to deal with was a 2.5-year-old in the barber chair, like trying to jump down while scissors are at his head, And so I really try to be super present with the day-to-day joyful moments that show up in life, because you just don't know when you're going to get those kinds of phone calls.
What have you learned about simply the biological implications of grief? What does it do to us bodily?
It does a lot. And that's a really, really good question, because I want people to understand this. So I'll speak to two specific things that I think are important for people to bear in mind as they're navigating grief and loss. So one thing, there is something called grief brain. And it has actually been studied on scans, like the impact that grief has on your brain reduces your ability to handle like any sort of executive functioning type tasks. And so this is why it's so important that we show up for one another when someone has encountered grief, grabbing some groceries for them, cleaning up their house, picking the kid up from soccer, whatever, because all of those very simple, basic things become much more challenging. And then the other thing that I think is really important, grief weakens the immune system. So oftentimes in the aftermath of a loss of any kind, the person will suddenly get a cold or get the flu or, come down with random XYZ thing. And it's like, oh my gosh, I just finally finished the funeral and like going through all of these public motions and this and that. And now I don't feel good on top of it all. And that's actually a very normal and predictable physiological response. The body has just taken on more than it can actually bear. And you usually do get sick from it.
Which takes us back, I guess, to spoon theory of taking seriously a limited amount of capacity that we all have in various contexts. I'd like to kind of switch to think a little bit more about the way your work has taken into account social and systemic realities. And the one way I'd like to get into that is to ask you, so you come right out of Harvard, you take a job at Wall Street, and then you take a position in the Obama administration. What would you say was helpful to you about going from Wall Street to the Obama administration?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I don't know if anybody's ever asked me that one. So practically on the skills front, I entered the administration when the country was in a really fragile place economically. I joined in early 2010. So we were sort of at the beginning phases of economic recovery post like 2008, 2009 recession. And most of the people who were a part of the president's economic cabinet at like the, more junior staffer level that I was a part of, they were primarily young people who worked on the campaign. So they, maybe they joined the campaign fresh out of college or like a year or two after college, and they were public service minded folks, but they didn't have an understanding of like balance sheets and income statements and access to capital and these like, finance world issues. And I was able to enter as a commodity trade lender who was constantly thinking about math and numbers and how money moves and how trade works. And so I was able to play, I think a fairly effective role on things like the work we did to implement the Small Business Jobs Act or implementation of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, because I had an understanding of, the way like money and investments and things of that nature worked. I also think I was given a lot of really good training in my job on Wall Street to make effective arguments, because I worked for the oldest private bank in the country. And so anytime I wanted to get a loan approved to, an energy trader in Texas or one of my coffee traders in Central America, like I had to put together a multi-page report and then present on it to the bank's senior most partners, general counsel, et cetera, because for all of those people, it was their money going out the door. And so, being a young Black girl with no previous finance experience and sitting there with a bunch of, it was all old white men who like I still love and adore. And, like sitting there and trying to like make the case for these traders, some of whom were a little squirrely, I'll be honest. You learned a lot on how to like be thoughtful, how to be strategic, how to construct an effective argument, how to anticipate the questions that someone was going to ask. And it definitely helped when, I got to the point where it was like, okay, you're going to be briefing Valerie Jarrett, or, so-and-so needs talking points for their meeting in the Oval Office, or, you're drafting the talking points for the president's meeting with CEOs and business leaders. Like it absolutely made that work easier.
So with that sort of perception, what would you say coming out of or taking from your experience in the Obama administration, what would be key insights that you developed just about social political realities that perhaps a lot of us might not think about on a day-to-day basis that you think are really important?
So I started thinking about social issues when I was a teenager. I was 15, and I was starting to notice that, there were these kids who were in my honors classes in middle school that then when we got to high school, they just fell away. And, you sit next to these kids. So like, you know that they're smart. And I was constantly questioning what has happened here? How come these kids that I know are intelligent, and maybe some of them fall off eventually for like competitive reasons, but I started asking bigger questions, like what is going on at home? Like what sort of things do I have from, my parents and grandparents and community and church and whatever that maybe they're not getting access to? And that led to me starting a mentoring program with my school district. And at the time, the Gap Corporation was building a distribution facility in our community. And so they gave a grant to fund this multi-year intergenerational mentoring program focused on high achieving but at risk middle school students, and then pairing them up with high achieving high school students. And so my mind has always been like, okay, but why? But why? And so in the Obama administration, I got a much deeper understanding of the why and the ways in which all sorts of systemic challenges that exist both nationally and at the community level, impact the odds of someone actually like making it in this country, whether you're talking about an individual or, a small business or, a manufacturing company in the Midwest. Like I started to see like, oh, okay, so this is why it works here, but it doesn't work there. And in almost every case, in addition to, the obvious like race concerns, so much of it was about socioeconomic status. Whether you were talking about issues of safety and criminal justice reform, or what businesses were succeeding, or, what kids are going to college and where they're coming from. And the more you understand, I think the angrier you become, because at the end of the day, and the thing that made me want to join the administration was a speech that the president gave in Kansas when he was still candidate Obama. I think it was either December of 2007 or January of 2008, because it was right before my mom passed away. And he talked about his vision for the American dream and how, it's not, and he would say this all the time in the White House, it's not about equality of outcome. Not every kid is going to go to Harvard. Not every kid is supposed to go to Harvard. Like that's obviously ridiculous, but it's about equality of opportunity. Like every child deserves the same starting position. And we know that that's just not what happens. And so what do we need to be doing to correct that? And that is a question that I am asking all the time. Like when I think about this work that I focus on more now with, grief and healing equity, at the end of the day, the people who are most often called to grieve are also the people who are most disconnected from the resources that facilitate healing. Whether we're talking about paid time off or the ability to afford childcare so that you can go to therapy, or even like resources like therapists and mental health providers in your community, quality healthcare system to support you when something in life goes sideways and the stress of that situation makes you sick, like we just talked about, and that just, it enrages me. Like I'm a little bit mad most of the time, and that's what drives most of my work.
Yeah. These sorts of concerns are not new in your family system, at least. I read a story about your grandfather in Statesboro, Georgia. Would you share that with us?
Yes. It's so funny because I'm like, oh my gosh, if he were still alive, would he be like, you need to stop telling that story? Maybe. But he's been gone for a couple of years, so he can't do anything about it. My grandfather, first of all, he was like a giant of a man. And, I feel very fortunate that he was a hands-on grandparent, even being like a man from a certain generation. Like he cleared out my sister and I, we had a sandbox and we wanted to turn it into a garden plot, and like cleared the whole thing out and like helped us plant the stuff, and then didn't yell at us when we didn't take care of it, was at every dance recital and track meet and basketball game and all the things. And so, he was also just very quiet, like a quiet giant. And I didn't hear this story until after he died. So only in the last couple of years was this made known to me. He knew, and I'm sure my grandmother as well, because she's very bossy, that the best opportunities for our family weren't going to be found in the South. And this story predates my father's birth. So my grandparents had their first 3 kids at the time. They were living in Statesboro, Georgia, which is where our family is originally from. And my grandfather was determined to like make his way north, and was initially offered an opportunity in Florida, and believed that that would offer a better chance of getting hired somewhere in the North from there. And so, they're making plans to leave. They are leaving the next day. That night before they're set to depart, the man who owned the fields where my grandfather worked, like he did agricultural work his entire career. He had, 6th or 7th grade education, but he could grow anything successfully. And so the guy who owned the farm where he was working showed up with some of his buddies, And they had trace chains, which I didn't even know what these were, but they're the thick, like metal chains, like super, super thick, that are used to attach a horse to a wagon. Obviously their intent was to beat him into submission and have him stay and work for them. Like, he was a really good worker. The man didn't retire until he was well into his 80s because people just kept offering him more money because he was so good. My grandfather met them at the door with shotgun in hand, and my family left the next morning. They were only in Florida for a matter of months before a man from the Hudson Valley, where I get to live today, offered my grandfather a job in New York. And they moved. They were a part of the 6 million Black Americans that migrated from South to North in the Great Migration.
It's just so remarkable to think about the decisions that generations before us make and the impact that has upon our own opportunities and privileges, doesn't it?
I love thinking about it. I have a friend of mine, Rabbi Steve Letter. He likes to say, how are you going to be a great ancestor?
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. And how are you thinking about being a great ancestor?
I want whoever comes after me to know that it is okay to take space to heal. Like, I feel like, we aren't great at just taking out time to do what we need to do to recover from the challenging things that happen to us. And I want people to know that is okay, that it should be encouraged, and that a key component of healing is joy.
Yeah. You share that you keep an ancient Bible by your bed, and in the very first page of Waiting for Dawn, perhaps in the preface, you mentioned being raised in the Black church. But I wonder how has your faith played into the things that you've been navigating, things you've been learning, things that the particular practice maybe of hope. How are you finding this to be of some sort of sustenance to you or not?
I absolutely have. I am a big faith person. I have admittedly not found the perfect fit church-wise the last couple of years where we live now. So still belong to our church down in DC. I was a Sunday school teacher. I preached a couple sermons. I've led Bible studies. I've done all the things. And I'm also someone who believes it is perfectly reasonable sometimes to be mad at God. There's an entire book in the Bible called Lamentations. I think it's important if you're going to have deep faith, I think it has to be coupled with real honesty and candor. So there has been, plenty of rage these last couple of years, and there have also just been the verses that pop in and lots of prayers. And I know that there are so many people who have been, even if they're not, physically proximate to us right now, who have just been praying for us to make it through this season. And that has been a really important piece of this for me, believing that everything will work together for good and trusting that there is a greater plan, not so much everything happens for a reason, because I don't know that I necessarily believe that, but I do believe that there is more than what we are capable of seeing or understanding fully in the present. And so, my hope is that not only my faith and commitment to hope and joy and just, leading a life that is really deeply rooted in equity and justice will be strengthened, but also that, someone else will see it and maybe it will help them too.
I appreciate that at least twice in our conversation, you've been reticent to want to go down that path of everything happens for a reason, or to fill our suffering with meaning. And perhaps there are realities of suffering that are simply absurd and should never be thought of as meaningful. And so I appreciate that sensitivity a lot myself. And the sort of acceptance of reality, and then trying to find a way to go forward through that. And I wonder, at the same time, it seems like there's another kind of possible pitfall would be to let grief, acceptance of grief, become a sort of debilitating identity, perhaps. Yeah. So how do you think about not accepting that kind of identity?
Yeah, it's so funny. I wish I knew what it was about me that like keeps me from doing that. But even in the worst of grief moments, like I still end up laughing and having a good time. And I might be like a crying, like weeping, sobbing mess a few minutes later, but I mean, look, this pink background, this is all real. Like, this is my personality.
Yeah, for those who are just listening, it's very hot pink. And a lot of very hot pink, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the entire room is painted this color, and everybody was like, wait, you're going to do built-in shelves, custom built-in shelves that are hot pink in a pink office? I was like, yeah, why not? And I think back to my mom's funeral, like this, oh my gosh. Oh my goodness, it was so bad. The pastor, one of his responsibilities, he was hiring this gospel singer to sing His Eyes on the Sparrow, because the woman who I wanted to sing it, honestly, I thought she was dead. She was not dead. She is still not dead. It was just a really bad, grief brain mistake on my part. This woman gets up and starts singing, and truly, I haven't heard anything that horrendous in my life since. Okay. And that laughter, that was my response. And you're sitting in the front row of the church, open casket is just feet away, and you're like trying to not make it clear that you're giggling, but my cousin is sitting on one side of me, and like I can feel her shaking. So like I know she's about to be like full laugh out loud. My grandmother is like elbowing us, but like I know she's snickering behind a handkerchief, like and then 5 minutes later, it's time to close the casket. And that is when I completely fall apart. So like, I am very committed to modeling after my son, letting both things be true and sometimes happen in close proximity. Like you can have the laughter and the joy, even in the midst of like the worst and most painful of experiences. And I want people to embrace that, because just because, you're dealing with a hard thing, and, I absolutely should have been on an antidepressant in the fall of 2024, but I missed the window. And by the time I realized that would have been a good idea, I didn't need it as much, because I could see that I was making slow but steady progress toward healing and recovery. And that was enough for me. So I think I want people who are, in it right now, in whatever way you are in it, I want you to figure out what is going to bring you some measure of joy. Whether it's the big joy of a trip to Paris, or last spring, I had to go to the Beyonce concert. Like there was just no way I was going to miss the Beyonce concert. I paid for it, but I had to be there. Or even just little things like a TV show you can get into that will make you laugh, because like those moments of joy and laughter and levity, they actually create space for your brain to process the loss, the challenge, the hardship. So like they are an important part of the healing process.
Been talking to Marisa Renee Lee about her newest book, Waiting for Dawn. Marisa, thanks so much for your lovely and helpful work. We're grateful, and thank you for the conversation with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
This episode is brought to you by Prime. What if you had one more chance with the one that got away?
Sam, you came home.
Based on the best-selling novel from Carly Fortune. Every Year After follows childhood friends Sam and Percy as they reunite in the dreamy, nostalgic lakeside town of Barry's Bay.
Love can be hard to find. So if you're lucky enough to find that person, never let go.
A second chance at first love. Every Year After, now streaming only on Prime.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carriet Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.